So welcome to our March 13th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. Thank you very, very much for attending. I know there's a lot of ways for you to spend your evening. We're glad that you chose to spend it with us. So it's gonna be very brief. I have no real announcements to make. If you have any, you could put them in the chat and feel free to share. So right now I am going to turn it over to my co-host, Rob Lutens, to introduce tonight's speaker. Rob?
Thank you, Joan. Avis de réception. What are these French words doing on English letters? Avis de réception, or the letters AR, are known as advice of delivery or return receipt. This category of the available postal services was seldom used in the United Kingdom or even much of the Commonwealth, except for the Indian subcontinent. Marked early examples are both difficult to recognize and acquire. The service provides a form that is signed by the recipient of a usually registered letter, and then the signed receipt is then sent back to the original sender of the letter, thus providing evidence that the letter had been received. Legal firms remain among the primary users of the Avis de réception service. The presentation this evening concerns the United Kingdom development of the Avis de réception service, and our presenter, David Handelman, will discuss the reluctant beginnings of the service in 1879 until around 1950. The General Post Office seems to have been less than enthusiastic regarding this service, as very few Avis de réception items are known from the 19th century. David's interest in Avis de réception material was an outgrowth of a comment by Horace Harrison in his 1971 book, Canada's Registry System, 1827 to 1911, where he shared that Canadian Avis de réception material was rare, prompting David to begin keeping an eye open for possible examples. He soon discovered that very little early Canadian material existed, so he branched out into worldwide Avis de réception. With the advent of eBay, an abundance of material soon became available, although it was often inadequately described. For those of you familiar with Richard Frejola's excellent website, Feel a Mercury, you can find over 40 items from David's collection, including worldwide Avis de réception and early Canadian postal history, which are all freely downloadable. There's also an online book on Avis de réception, likely to be revised in the next few months. David's first collecting interest was stampless Canadian postal history, which evolved into Canadian registration and miscellaneous topics, all of which he continues to collect. He is a mathematician, an emeritus professor at the University of Ottawa, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Note, this is not the Royal Philatelic Society, but rather the Academic Society. Hit the chat button to see the link to Richard Frejola's site and for more information on his mathematics interests using the link mathoverflow.net. I'm going to place both of these into the chat when I finish talking here. So without further ado, I give you our esteemed presenter for this evening, David Handelman.
Thank you, Rob. You hardly left me anything to talk about. Well, AR. First, this is not the Antiques Roadshow. Although I anticipate that many in the audience are antiques, not to mention the speaker. So what's AR? As Rob mentioned, it's a postal service that when you send a registered letter, you get a form or card signed by the addressee as evidence of delivery. And this is often used in the legal system. It goes under a large number of names, probably 3 or 4 dozen. Acknowledgement of receipt in Canada, advice or acknowledgement of delivery in UK and some of the Commonwealth, acknowledgement due in India and surrounding area, return receipt. Then there's also double registered, translated, which is a translation of one of the terms from Chinese, and various others in Italy. Particularly important one is retour récépissé, which was used for about a century in the Austrian Empire, and then there's Rückschein in the German-speaking countries. So let's give a brief history of the service. Starting in the early 1790s, late 1780s, Austria implemented this service. It had a lot of red tape. It was far more complicated than the later versions. This spread to German states and then to parts of Europe. And they had, initially it was for domestic or inland service only, and then internationally. In 1859, France allowed it or introduced it. In 1875, just as the GPU was forming, it was required to have AR service among the initial signatories, including the UK. However, UK didn't actually offer it until 4 years later. That's April Fool's Day, 1879. AR service was offered in the UK only internationally. And from that date on, every country that joined the UPU was required, is a bit too strong, but was strongly encouraged to offer it. In 1891, the UK offered domestic AR service. Domestic is often referred to as inland. In 1892, the UPU Treaty of Vienna changed the procedures. It made them quite awkward, actually, and these were reverted in 1899. So they undid the changes, Treaty of Vienna, and that plays a role in the postal history involved with AR. And around 1921-22, most countries, including the UK, switched from forms, which were the things that were sent back and forth, to cards. They look like postcards and they're made of cardstock. So it's a fairly obscure service, except in a few places like the US, India, France, Italy. And it's worthwhile going over the procedures. So pre-1892, we're talking only about the GPU-UPU period from 1875. Pre-1892, a registered letter for which you want AR service, in other words, we'll call it an AR cover, it was taken to the post office to be registered. A form was prepared at the office, and it was attached to the registered letter and sent off. A few jurisdictions sent it in the same mailing, but separately. Now, the AR fee, there was, of course, a charge for this in almost all places. The AR fee could be paid either on the form or on the registered letter, and this was up to the jurisdiction. If the registered letter was delivered, the recipient was requested to sign the form. If they declined, they could decline it, but sign for it as a registered letter. That is, they declined to sign the AR form. The postmaster was supposed to sign it. And the form would then be sent to the office of origin and as registered mail until a bit later. And from there, the form would be sent to the original sender. Now, the form itself, as we'll see plenty of examples, could be either in the form of a folded letter sheet, that's how it was returned, or could require a covering envelope, which we call an AR covering envelope. And larger post offices had special envelopes of this kind in stock. During the Treaty of Vienna period, 1892 to 1898, the form was prepared in the destination office, which sounds very strange. And that required the AR fee to be paid on the registered cover. You couldn't pay it on the AR form. It also meant that the form was from the destination country, and not from the country of origin. And AR or its equivalent, was supposed to be marked on the registered cover. In 1898, they reverted to the previous practice. Form was once again prepared at the office of origin, and it was up to the jurisdiction whether the AR fee should be paid on the form or on the registered letter. For UK, it's on the form or later the card, not on the registered letter, with a few very unusual exceptions. From the 1900s, it depended for before the 1900s, the AR form itself was returned by registered mail, but sometime in the 1900 to 1920, depending on the jurisdiction, the AR form would be returned by regular mail. Around 1922, most jurisdictions replaced the forms, which were flimsy pieces of paper, by cards resembling postcards, cardstock. For UK, the date was, well, that's an error. It says 1 June 22. It's actually 1 January 22, but it depended on when the particular office received the cards. And one change, the cards would be sent directly to the sender. Previously, the forms were sent to the office of origin, and they would send it to the sender by some means. And we'll see a potential example of that a bit later. So here's the organization. I mentioned AR forms. Those are the forms that are to be signed by the recipient. The covering envelopes, which were used to return the forms to the office of origin. The AR covers, the normally registered letters marked with AR, and there are also cards. And it's convenient to divide in three portions. The pre-Treaty of Vienna period, that's 1875 to 92. We'll have examples of AR forms and then AR covering envelopes, but only incoming registered AR covers, because as far as I know, none outgoing exist. In the Treaty of Vienna period, where the rules were changed, we'll have forms, the covering envelopes, and AR covers, all three. And in the post-Vienna period, we'll have the forms, the covering envelopes, the cards, which came out in 21, 22, and then the covers. Domestic AR was handled differently in the UK, so that all that stuff was for the international. Domestically, they had forms, which were all of the folded letter sheet form and AR covers. They didn't need covering envelopes. And finally, we have two examples of something really, really obscure, avis de paiement, about which I'll say more at the end. So let's start with the very first AR form. In April 1879, UK initiated international AR service. And here's an example. They issued two types of forms, one in English, one in French. And this was the folded letter sheet type. In other words, returned to sender as a folded letter sheet. And this is the outside. We'll see the inside in a second. But if you look at the upper middle, you see the address is Hedenhall, England. So that's where it was supposed to be returned, the office of origin. And that would have been it would have been folded, so that appears on the outside. The stamp is tuppenny halfpenny, which was the AR fee, although it happened to, by accident, equal the UPU letter rate. This AR forms travel free through the mail, and any stamps on them pay the fees, not actual postage. So this would have been applied when the form was prepared at the original office, Heden in Hull. You can also, this is a form for a registered letter sent from Heden Hull in England to some Rostock in Mecklenburg-Schwerin. There are two Mecklenburgs, so you have to be careful. And that was the outside. You see the bottom middle, you see the for the postmaster, et cetera, et cetera. That probably appeared on the outside when it was attached to the cover, as was going to Germany. And here's the inside. Uh, you can see all the particulars are there when it was mailed. It's sort of signed, although I'm not completely sure. I could make out the word "selbst," which in the German, it's hard to read that. It's signed for someone or something. I'm not really sure. And then it would have been sent back. Now, as I said, UK issued 2 forms of this type, one in English, one in French. This is the only example known of the English language one, and I'm unaware of any French language, any examples of the French language one. Let's go to the second known form. And this is now really different. This was, the previous one was printed in 79 when the AR service was initiated. This one was printed a bit later. The previous one was finally used in 83 or something, 86. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but there's a long delay. Here again, this thing was printed, just move this in 86 and used in 91. Those delays are not unusual. AR service is so obscure that forms sit around in offices for years and years, sometimes 20 years, 30 years. This one differs quite a bit from the previous one. First of all, it's on card, not a letter sheet, and it's required to be sent in a covering envelope. And you can even see it had to be creased in order to fit, and there's a crease right along the middle. It's bilingual, whereas the previous one we saw was English only. And this one, and it has the stamp paying the AR fee, remained the same for a very long period. And this was for a registered letter from the German embassy in London to Vancouver, BC. And this is the earliest known AR form to Canada. So it's quite different. And you can see the signature at the bottom. And the postmaster has also signed it. Okay. Now, here's another form, still in the pre-Treaty of Vienna period, except you see it's really different. First of all, the wording is different. It says acknowledgement of delivery of an inland registered, and inland means domestic. So this was actually a form intended for domestic use, which started in 1891 in Britain. This is dated 1892, but before the Treaty of Vienna came into effect. And the postmaster at Dollar, Scotland, has applied a twopenny stamp. And that's because that's what it says underneath the stamp. We'll see an example of that later. But the fee, the international AR fee from UK was twopenny halfpenny. So it was a halfpenny short, but nobody noticed. And this was a misuse. He used the wrong form, but then again, he may not have had the right international form. Nonetheless, nobody knows the deficiency, and it was signed at the bottom in somewhere, Berlin, signed in the purple ink in 1892. And this was to be returned. The instructions say to return it as a folded letter, as a folded letter sheet, which I think it was, judging by the wear and tear on it. Okay, so this was a mistake, but it's still in this period. So now we go to the covering envelopes. These were, in this period, used to return the forms to the office of origin. So in other words, you sent, in the first case, you sent a registered letter from Calcutta. See the address here. It would have been for returning it to the sender. So it's from Calcutta. And this one is actually from the British Post Office in Constantinople. Remember, the title wasn't just UK, it was offices and islands. So, or islands and offices. So I have to include some British offices. And you see A few things. This form was specially designed. In English, it's returned acknowledgement of delivery, and avis de réception en retour in French. And it was returned as a registered letter, which so it enclosed the form, and it would have had an Indian AR form because it was being returned. The form was attached to the registered letter, and that was signed and then returned. Another a bit later, that was 1883, which is among one of two earliest British AR covering envelopes. And another one a bit later, 1886, returned to Paris and would have contained a French AR form. And you also see there's a slight difference in these envelopes. There's nothing up in the upper left of the top one, but in the upper right one says number 26. All subsequent official covering envelopes of UK were given the form number 26. Now, as I mentioned, now we're still in this period pre-Treaty of Vienna, and as I mentioned, there are no known outgoing AR covers from UK. So here's an incoming one. This is a heavy letter from Warsaw when it was under Russian domination. If you look at the lower left corner, you see avec retour récépissé, which is, and it's misspelled. The term retour récépissé that I mentioned earlier was the Austrian Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire term for AR. So that's what they used. The postage was 70 kopecks, of which is sextuple rate of 10 kopecks per 15 grams and 10 kopecks registration. And the AR fee would have been paid on the form, which is why it wouldn't be mentioned, indicated here. And it has about 9 heavy wax seals. So it weighed about 90 grams. That's substantial. Now we move, the material in the pre-Vienna period is really quite extremely difficult to find. We move a bit ahead in the Treaty of Vienna to the Treaty of Vienna period, 1892 to 98, and it becomes a little more, I wouldn't say a little commoner, but it's less difficult to find material. So here's a form, Jersey to France. Now the rules changed, and so this form would have have been prepared in the destination. The destination was the island of Jersey, and that's why we have a British form. And it was for a registered letter from La Roche someplace in France. There were no stamps on the form because the AR fee would have been paid on the French covering AR cover. And this one was signed by Madame Gougot and properly returned. And the instructions say to return it under cover. They had required a covering envelope. The very first form that we saw required was a folded letter sheet. All subsequent ones required a covering envelope. Okay. And here's one. This is rather interesting. It was printed in January 1893, which was early in the Vienna period, within 6 months of its starting. And it was used almost at the very end of the Vienna period, a few days later, and you would have been in the period of the Treaty of Washington, where the rules changed. And it was printed in a very low quantity of 1,000. Some of these early forms, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, but this 1,000 is really low. And this was for a registered letter from Neustadt in the Black Forest to Dalry in Scotland. And so in this period, it would have been a British AR form. And you also see it was used over 5 years after printing, and all these forms had to be returned under cover. So it would have been returned in a covering envelope. Also, all these forms are form number 68, the international use AR forms. The very earliest ones didn't have the form numbers on them. So now we go to the covering envelopes in this period. And these are, because of the peculiarity of the Vienna rules, these would have contained the forms of, these would have contained British AR forms that had been prepared on incoming registered letters. So the top one, addressed to Quito in Ecuador, it would have contained the British AR form acknowledging receipt of a registered item from Quito. And it itself is returned registered, indicated by the Blue Cross and all the registration postmarks. There are also these two crown things, which are part of a larger cancel, and I don't know what the significance is. It looks like they deliberately cancel them to just show the crown, but I don't know. I don't really know why, and I don't know what cancel it's from. And we still see the number 26. Here's another one that's a bit later. So this is the same form as one of the earlier ones. A bit later, this was 95. And you see there's a difference in the covering envelope. The wording is simplified from avis de réception en retour, just avis de réception, similarly in English. And you can also see differences. There are a lot of different kinds of forms of this type, and you can see in the spacing below the rules here, the straight lines, if you've just compared the lengths or the distances, there are a large number of these forms in this period and the next one, these form covering envelopes. Okay. So finally, we can show an outgoing AR cover from UK. This is December 1892, which is fairly early. It's within 6 months, and this is the earliest known, or certainly the earliest I'm aware of. The distinguishing feature is the big AR postmark in the middle. And this style of hand stamp was a standard one in use in UK for 60, 70 years. Well, 60 years anyway. You look at the postage, it agrees with what it should be, namely there is a charge for registration. That's the twopenny stamp here. A charge for UPU letter rate, it's addressed to New York. That's 2.5, and another 2.5 for the AR fee. Of course, it could possibly be double UPU, and they and they made a mistake in not applying the AR fee. But we can never know, and the more logical explanation is that they did it correctly. So this was from the city, so they might have known what they were supposed to be doing. Okay. Here's another one, which doesn't have the AR stamp, but it does have an endorsement at the top it was just written by the sender, registered and acknowledgement prepaid, and then somebody put a big AR. Possibly the sender did that too, but then the postal clerk underlined it with blue crayon. And again, did the usual Blue Cross for registration. And this one has double rate, and the postage works out exactly. And I suspect a small office probably didn't have the AR hand stamp. Maybury to Geneva in 1894. And here's another really interesting one, and it looks that way too. This was mailed from BPO Constantinople to New York. And the British stamps were overprinted for use in the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. They were all overprinted 40 paras, which the Ottoman rates were 40 paras for each of registration, AR, and UPU, which is actually more expensive than what the British fees would have been because registration was only tuppence. And what had made it to New York, well, they couldn't find this oyster and dining room. And so you can see New York DLO thing here and various other markings indicate tried, unclaimed, and then finally it was left part. The addressee had left, and there was no return address, so presumably it would have been returned to sender. And you can see it's pretty dilapidated, but I like dilapidated covers. Here's an AR form in the post-Treaty of Vienna period. Oh, wait a second. Yeah. Okay, so we're out of the Treaty of Vienna period and we're into post-Treaty of Vienna. So that's from January 1899 on. Now this form is really large. It's foolscap size, and I had to reduce it, and it only shows the top 2/3. We'll see eventually the reverse contains spaces for a lot of postmasters to fill in remarks, because this could also be used as an inquiry form to find out, to track letters. Each post office would have to mark, oh, we received such and such a letter and we sent it off on this date. And you'd get a whole sequence of them. Anyway, it's the same general style. It's still form number 68. It's a great big thing. The English wording has changed to advice of delivery. The fee is still 2.5. And this was for a registered letter from London to Stettin in Germany. And again, because it's in the post-Treaty of Vienna period, the process reverted to the previous one, which means this would have accompanied the registered letter en route to Germany. Now here's another one, which I had to reduce even more, just to show the various dates and things. From January 1899, you could ask for AR service even if you had already had the registered letter sent off. In other words, you could delay sending the AR form until after the registered letter had been posted. Process. So we call this after the fact. And in most countries, there is no extra charge above the regular AR fee for this. All this changed a few decades later. This is rather unusual, and we can actually go through the dates in this one example. Most of these, they had to fill in so much stuff. You wonder why they didn't often make mistakes. In fact, they did make mistakes, but in this case, everything was in order. According to the information on the form, the registered letter was mailed at Newry in Ireland on 20th December 1905 to Cohoes, New York. And on 1 January 1906, it was delivered. Then on the 12th of January, so 11 days after the letter had actually been delivered, this form was prepared at Newry, Ireland. And in fact, that's the date on the cancel here. And by the 20th of February, the form had arrived at Cohoes, the destination, and it was signed by both the addressee and the postmaster. And these sort of exceptional things were often sent to the main post, well, to Washington, to the postal inspector to check that everything was okay. And in fact, it was. And then this would have been put in a covering envelope mailed from Washington to Newry. And again, it's really large. It's the same size as the predecessor. foolscap size. Now here's one. It's different again. This is an AR form from BPO Shanghai, the British Post Office in Shanghai, which I never expected there to be an example of this, but I managed to find one. So this is for a registered letter from Shanghai to London in 1918. The BPO closed in 1922. The AR fee is paid by the 10-cent Hong Kong stamp overprinted China. And it was properly signed, although and it was properly signed and then presumably returned to sender. And again, it required a covering envelope. So this isn't as big as the previous ones, but it's still quite large. Okay. And here is another totally different looking form. This one from mainland UK. This is dated February 1922. Cards were ostensibly introduced in January of 22, so it's a little unexpected. It's also quite a bit different from the other large forms. The color is different for one thing, but so is the wording. From Ludgate Circus in London to Pittsburgh, the AR fee had increased to threepence from 2.5. And everything again was in order, was properly signed and dated. But it's quite different. When we discuss AR cards, which might have been contemporary with this, we'll see that the rules were that an office that received the AR cards, which are postcard size and thickness, were required to dispose immediately of their forms. So it meant that this office had not yet received the cards, or they violated the rules. Now, we discussed forms. Now we go to covering envelopes in the post-treaty Vienna period. And here's an amusing example from Huddersfield to Cherry Tree. You'll notice all the things. Well, it's unusually marked AR. This is a bit odd, but because it wasn't necessary. And it was addressed to Cherry Tree, U.S. America. So when it arrived in New York, that's the DLO marking, they had to figure out what state. And presumably, they just opened it up and looked at the form, and it would probably say what state. So this would have contained a U.S. form returned sender in Cherry Tree. The bottom one is a mourning AR covering envelope. This is dated June 2002. The official envelope, some official mourning envelopes were introduced when Queen Victoria died in 1901. And you also see that in this case, they just said Stokesville, USA, and they didn't give the state, but whoever, the British official who put the registration cross on it, probably opened it up and looked at the form and said, oh, this VA, Virginia. So it get, oops. Okay, just also the wording. Okay, no, I mentioned that. Okay. Let's give some more forms. Now there's a surprising number of forms that are all slightly different from each other in use for quite a long while, even though the corresponding AR material like forms or cards are relatively rare. So these covering envelopes, they made many of them. Up to this point, the AR forms in the covering envelopes were returned by registered mail, but this stopped around in early 1908. And here are a couple bracketing the change. So this from Fulham, addressed to Munich in Holland, which was an obvious mistake, but presumably it was corrected, with a Fulham skeleton. That's sort of interesting. And this was March 07. Here's one February 08, which isn't set registered, from Chiswick. The 35 is not a registration number, it's an office number for Munich post offices. Now the wording has changed again. What the English translation went from acknowledgement of delivery to advice of delivery. So here's one from May 08 to Munich. And then we have this large format, which was ideal for containing large AR forms. This is used in 1914 to Australia. And it's still with Form 26 on really poor quality paper, browns very easily. But this style of form continued to be used to 1932, which is also a bit odd, as we'll see when cards are introduced. Here is a different style of form, or a covering envelope. This was used in 1928 to UK or to Berlin. It's almost surely the case that Berlin or Germany was using, well, Germany was using AR cards at the time. So why they needed a covering envelope is unclear, although maybe they just decided to return the card inside this envelope. It was just big enough for it. And here's an Irish form of it. And I don't know the year of this, but I imagine it's after independence. So who knows? This is for a registered letter from Alney in North Yorkshire. And the main difference, of course, is the Irish middle line. Okay, so here are AR. Now, some AR covering envelopes, well, some smaller office would not have had all the official AR covering envelopes. So they had to make do with whatever they had. And sometimes they used official envelopes which weren't intended for that purpose, as these examples, and sometimes they use a random envelope. So in this case, they took an official envelope. This was 1901. They replaced the "On Her Majesty's Service" with "On His," and you see the "Avis de réception" in here, and it's sent to the post office, the postmaster in Baltimore. Here's another one. This is also sent to the US, so it would have contained a USAR form. And you see the notation "return receipt," which is the American formula for AR. And here's one that just, this was from a tiny village, Mastergeehy, in 1921 in Ireland. And it's not using an official form. Anomalously, it's returned registered, but they didn't really know what was going on. I mean, they wouldn't have seen it this very often. It has a low registration number and everything, but just use a random envelope here. And the reason we know this is the AR, and it's addressed to the postmaster in Hartford. Around early 1922, cards were introduced. The earliest I've seen was use March 22. In the 20s, the printings were poor quality cardstock and they turned brown. So I don't know what the original color was. The main difference with the forms was these were now to be returned to the person directly, not to the office of origin. So they'd have the return address and it would get sent there in the regular mail. And this is quite a remarkable one. It was sent from London, an office in London, to Paris, the registered letter with a card attached. And 2 days later, not only was it received, it was signed for by everyone concerned. That's remarkable. I don't know how long it took to come back. And here are a couple more. This was used in 33, although it was printed in 25. And there's a mistake here. This portion was supposed to be the return address, the address to which it was returned. So this was a registered, this accompanied a registered letter from UK to Calcutta. And for some reason, they put that destination office that should have been the return address here. And here's the one a bit later. This has also it's a VD card as well. It covers VD. That's valeur déclarée up to 60 pounds. So it's insurance. Here's the second one is 5 pounds. And this is returned from Latvia. And in the 1930s, the cards turned pink. Now, if a card were not returned, then the sender of the registered letter could ask for and get a duplicate AR card being sent out. And this is an example. It wouldn't require postage because the postage was already paid in the previous one, on the previous AR card. This is marked duplicate, and you can check from actually the dates of everything, which are on the date information. In this case, the registered letter and the original card, probably on philatelic business, was mailed November 38. No card was returned. Duplicate card was mailed 6 months later in April 39. It was addressed to the postmaster in Turan, which is the center of Asia. It's in Tuva. And it got back amazingly within 2 months in June 39. On reverse, which I'm not showing, there have been transliterations of everything to Tuvan. And this was accompanied by a form letter or a covering letter from the Divisional Controller's Office in the London Post region explaining the situation. So this Hutchinson appears to have been a dealer, a stamp dealer. Now we go to covers in this period, and they're still difficult to find. Here's one for this is fairly early in the post-Vienna period, 18th February. Of course, it's not 3 weeks after the change. It's 8 weeks or 7 weeks after the changeover. But the postage is right. Everything is fine. The AR hand stamp is there. Here's another, here's another one, the bottom one. Well, this is not only AR, it's VD and late fee as well. So VD is valeur déclarée, insured, and late fee is paid. And you look at the amount it's insured for, 12 pounds, and you calculate all the rates, and the postage just adds up correctly. And you can see the remnants, it's not in great shape, and you can see the remnants of the wax seals that are normally seen on insured registered mail from UK. And here's one without the AR hand stamp, again from a small town. This is from Abington to Rotterdam and forward to Vienna and then return to sender. And they didn't have a hand stamp, so they just marked it AR. And again, and here's one from BPO Smyrna in the Ottoman Empire to Michigan. And in this case, unlike the previous BPO Constantinople cover, they didn't use Turkish overprinted stamps or stamps for use in Turkey. They just used the regular British stamps, well, stationary, with the standard AR hand stamp. And again, everything was in order. It wasn't too long after this that the BPO was closed. Now, here's one. The main feature, well, it's London to Paramaribo in Suriname. It's returned to sender. This is 1934. The rates are fine. Didn't have a hand stamp, even though this was a London office, so they just marked it AR. But you see this tracing or this trace of a paper clip. A number of these show these paper clips, and it's possible that this is how in this period they attached the card, in this case, to the cover. With the forms, it's probable that they used gum or a blob of glue or something, but it's not clear. But it's possible, though it's not absolutely certain, that they used these to attach the cards. Here's another one with VD from Wandsworth in London. And this one, well, it's VD, and you can figure out the rates, and you find that it's 1 penny short. And this is actually noted in the lower right corner, deficiency reported. Now, it's not charged 1 penny postage due, so I think the conclusion is that the clerk who registered this thing, who sent it off, would be docked the 1 penny, because that's what they did. If you if you've caused it to be underfranked, you were charged the difference. Here's a bit later, 38. This is a slightly larger and much less commonly seen AR cancel. It's from London to Vienna, 38. And here's a different one. This is also a Valeur Declaré. Well, it has a sticker, but it's only for £1, which is probably included in the default registration anyway, in 39. But this is printed on it, so it's probably a large firm sending these out. The AR is actually printed there, and with a meter. So now we go to domestic service or inland service. The AR forms are always folded letter sheets, not cards. They didn't require covering envelopes. The AR fee was always paid on the form. The domestic AR fee was was less than the international fee, as we saw on that Scottish form from Dollar. But then in 1920, they were made equal. And there's a mystery about these things because there are lots and lots of domestic AR forms compared to the domestic AR covers, but there should be a one-to-one correspondence. And these domestic AR covers wouldn't have been discarded because they were registered. So you should be able to, there should be as many of one as the other. So let's look at the early forms. Now this is quite distinctive. This is for a registered letter within Dublin, and it has the two penny stamp paying the fee. This is 94, and it's a folded letter sheet, and the blue stuff is tape used to tape it together. Here's a duplicate. We saw a duplicate before. In this case, it was filled out at the destination office rather than the office of origin, and you can check from the dates that it was mailed. It was received the next day, and then a couple of weeks later, the form was sent out because it hadn't been returned, and the form was prepared first in pencil and then gone over in ink by the destination postmaster. And then, as with the international AR forms, the domestic ones were enlarged, probably for the same reason. And you can see on the back there are 3 places for comments by postmasters, because it could be used as an inquiry form where they'd have to fill in, received this cover such and such a day, then we sent it out such and such a day. All the domestic forms that I've seen, but one, this one, have letter. You're supposed to fill in either letter or parcel. This one has parcel rather. It's the only one I've seen. just it just doesn't seem to be very, that's out of about 70. Presumably there are others around. And you also see the variation in types. There are dozens and dozens of different forms. This is also after the fact, and you check that with just by going through the dates. And here's one that's completely different from all the predecessors, possibly because it may have been from Ireland. It refers to Queenstown, but there are several Queenstowns in the British Isles, and probably this is the Irish one, but I can't be certain. And here's one after independence, after Irish independence. It's the Irish form with an Irish stamp and the language. It's folded so that this would be they would fold it so this would show this on the right, and there's some Irish on this side, but I don't think there's any on the actual interior. So this was within Ireland. And here's one from just a relatively modern one, 1962, with Queen Elizabeth. The AR fee has risen to sixpence. And now this thing, here's a domestic use of an old covering envelope. This 93. It's within London. It's addressed to an explicit address, so it suggests that it likely contained one of the international forms that should be sent to the back to they got it to the office of origin, and they would send it to the person directly to the person. But there could be other explanations, which I give, but that's the most likely explanation. Now, covers, there aren't many domestic ones, and here are a couple of examples. This is not anymore the earliest one. This is 1903. Maurice Buxton has found one from 1893. With that 10-year gap means they're hard to find. Oops. And here's one from London to Jersey in 1923. And now we see we see the paper clips. There's the inner trombone and there's the outer portion of the trombone. This was returned to sender with the form still attached. And we can verify this, but first the same registration number, 7175. And we look on the cover and there's no indication of AR. So if we didn't have the form, we wouldn't know. And it might be that that's the explanation for the dearth of domestic AR covers. They frequently didn't bother to put it on there. And here's another one within Jersey, a later one, returned to sender with all the usual things. They didn't have an AR hand stamp, they just mimicked it. And now, avis de paiement. If you sent a postal money order, if you wanted to issue a postal money order, you'd go to your post office and they would pay the fee and the money, and they would send an advice to the post office of destination, who would inform the payee, the person receiving the money, who would come in and cash the money order. But sometimes the payer, who sent the original, would like evidence. So there was a form or later a card, so that that would be signed not by the recipient, but by the clerk who arranged the thing. That would be sent back to the sender of the postal money order. So it works somewhat similarly. For Britain, it seems to work the reverse of every other jurisdiction I know of, where the card would be prepared at the office of origin, but here it's an office of destination. So this was a money order for 10 pounds from Gondal in India, and it was paid to someone in Southampton Row. I guess that's London. Yeah, it is London. And this was signed. So this form was prepared at the destination office and signed by the postmaster. So this is a really obscure service, and probably most people haven't heard of it. Certainly I hadn't until I came across things like this. And here's a card. So that was a form. This is the card, which I guess when they introduced AR cards, they introduced these things too. And again, this is for a money order on India, 2 pounds, 8 shillings. And it was cashed. And then the postmaster signed, or somebody signed it. It's not really clear who. And so this is an example of a British AP card, of which I've only seen this one. I've only seen the one AP form also from UK. So if you run across these things, please let me know. So that's the talk. For more information, there are a whole bunch of things on Frajola's board, including the online book on AR and an exhibit of UK AR. Both of these are going to be revised over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was a wonderful presentation. Area I had no knowledge of whatsoever before. I have a question. The treaties and the various rules that were being set up, in the late 1800s there, were they in conjunction with or independent of the UPU?
They were part of they were UPU treaties.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. But I'm never really certain about, well, first of all, those could be superseded by local treaties. So you had special relations between the countries. They could change they didn't have to abide by the UPU terms. They could arrange their own for mail between themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like Canada, US probably did that for AR, and Australia, New Zealand certainly did.
All right. Duncan Barber had a question. He wants to know if the sizes of the AR hand stamps are recorded, for comparison.
Well, for Britain, there isn't much. They all seem to be in the same. There are only 2 sizes. One, the common one, relatively common one. They're all the same, and there are 3 of the larger one, which are the same. So it's not very exciting. If you look at other countries, like China had hundreds and hundreds of completely different looking ones. And Germany had none at all except for a few for a very short period. They just wrote the equivalent Druckschein on the thing. And the US had thousands for return receipt. So it just varies from country to country. But for UK, there wasn't much variety. They just either issued them the normal one, or a few places had a slightly larger one. But I don't know anything more about them.
Okay. Ravi Vora, you have your hand up. You're muted.
David, that is an outstanding presentation,
Thank you.
an amazing amount of research that you have condensed into a very understandable story. I have a couple of questions. One of that is last year in November, I attended a symposium on UPU at State College. I think Joanne and some others were there. And the question I have for David is, in your research and the presentation of the information you shared, what UPU treaty agreements did you come across that either confirms your analysis and or provides other additional insights? I have another question, but I think this is probably good enough. And there may be other people who want to ask equally informative questions. Thank you.
Well, I looked at some of the conditions of the Treaty of Vienna, but I had prior knowledge because I knew about various other authors that quoted the Treaty of Vienna, so I knew how it affected um, AR, and really there wasn't much else. Mostly, I look for examples, and then I try to check if that coincides with what I know or with what's in the treaty. So it's sort of going in reverse. Starting with
If
my philosophy is, well, you can have treaties, but did they actually abide by them? And so you look at the covers and see what happens.
just as a suggestion, David, if I may,
Yeah.
the UPU headquarters in Bern,
Yes.
they have an office of the history and archives. And the gentleman there, I think, attended the event in State College. Uh, I'm sure it may be useful to connect. The second question or comment I have is I have seen number of examples of use of U.S. penalty envelopes for either sending or returning both the money order receipts and registration receipts. These go back to 1880s, 1890s. And I was just curious. Well, so my question is whether AR service was just not widely practiced or used in US or between US and other UPU members. Just
Oh,
curious.
yeah. Are you're referring to U.S. Forms and receipts and so on, or you
But
find
yes,
actually? Although I was going to say that the really great place for AR is India, because
yep,
you can find money order forms and everything else in vast quantities on eBay. I mean,
mm,
that's what I gave up trying to do domestic India because it was
yep.
just too massive an amount of material. But the AR in general is really hard to find for almost every country in the pre 92 era. And so it's not surprising that the US, however, there's probably proportionally more of the US material than for most other countries. Certainly Britain, Canada, Australia, it's really hard to find the stuff. For US, it's relatively a lot easier, but it's still not easy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi.
Uh,
David, I'm confused about one thing that you were talking about. Did you say that like around 1900 or so, you could send a request after the initial
Yes.
letter was sent?
Yeah, yeah. After the fact service was part of the Treaty of Washington. So
How did
from
they match up later on if you weren't, accompanying the registered letter?
Oh, well, you had to have the receipt, and so you had the registration number, and that would be sent to registered letters were tracked very well. And so you would send the form, you'd have the registration number, which would be sent to the destination, and they would have recorded the registration
Okay.
number
Okay.
and everything else.
All right. All right. Do we have any other questions this evening?
It's Ken Nelson here. I've got a comment on the special relations between neighboring countries and so on. The general rule of the UPU, as I understand it, is that countries could agree among themselves different rules as long as they were to the advantage of the correspondents. So if it was more advantageous than the UPU rule, you could have a rule between, say, Canada and the US, or between Britain and all its colonies. But it had to be better than the rule and the treatment under the UPU. So that's how you get things like the tuppence halfpenny UPU letter rate from Britain, being reduced to a penny to all the empire destinations in 1898. And so you could do that as long as it was more advantageous than the to the correspondence than the UPU rule.
Oh, thank you, Ken. I wasn't aware of that. After that, it had to be beneficial to the correspondence.
Thanks for that, Ken. Les Lanfear.
Yeah, I just want to say hello to David. We've corresponded many years ago.
Yeah.
Yep. And nice to see you.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah. You have some great material and a
Thank
nice, good presentation.
Paul Wiesnatz, I see you have your hand up. Are you muted? We can't hear you.
Audio. You might want to go to that little hat and make sure you have your headphone, had the right setting.
Is this better?
Yes, now we can
There we
hear
go.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, David, nice to see you again. Hello from Belgium. It's
Oh, hi. How are you, Paul?
I'm fine. I'm fine. It's about midnight, so I have to agree with what just Ken Nelson said. So he is completely correct on his analysis regarding that. Let's say the rates.
Yep. Oh, was that a question? Oh, no, sorry.
No, it was just a little remark and
Okay.
On what Ken Snelson was saying. So he is correct with his analysis on the AR thing. I know AR, it's a very complex thing, and it's a bit like, well, let's say a sideline service on UPU. UPU itself has a lot of rules and whatever, but can make perfect analysis on the difference of a lower rate and advantage and whatever and whatever.
Thank you.
Thanks for that support, Paul. Dr. Duncan Barber.
Yes, from 1908 to 1957, the rates to the US, to amplify what Ken said, were lower due to a treaty between the UK and the US. So the US, the empire rate applied to the US, which
Yes.
I seem to recall teasing people that was because the Declaration of Independence was mailed, surface mail to the UK, and it took till 1957 for it to arrive. But since it started in 1908, that can't possibly be true.
Oh, Duncan.
Well, I brought everyone over. If you still need to be brought over, raise your hand. But you might not see this, but Ed Grabowski, who I need to do a shout out to because I think he's responsible for introducing us to David. Ed.
Yeah, actually, where's David? Hello, David.
Hi, how are you? You're not showing, just your name is showing.
Oh,
Video not showing.
okay. I don't know how to turn on the picture, so I'll just leave it with my name. I wanted to ask you a question. It looked like the return receipts were often 2.5 pence. Am I correct in that?
Until yeah, for quite a while, then it rose to 3.
Okay, well, I'm contrasting that with primarily in the 1890s and first decade of the 20th century. The French rate was 10 centimes, not 25 centimes.
Yeah,
So were these rates established by the local countries for the AR receipts?
yes,
Ah,
yes.
okay.
Kind of wide variation. It was a free option for international AR from the US until 1925. France was very cheap, 10 centimes. UK was actually it was more expensive than registration, which was very unusual. Canada was equal to registration. And so it just in fact, most European countries, it was equal to the registration fee. In China, that's what may have been why it's called double registered, because for a very long time in China, both the domestic and the international AR fees were the same as their registered counterparts. They weren't equal to each other, but they were equal to the registration fees. So it seems as though every country decided for themselves, the same way they decided, well, should we use a form that requires a covering envelope or a form that requires that can be sent as a folded letter sheet? As far as I can tell, there's no legislation or agreement or anything. Just they did what they wanted to.
Okay. Another thing, I just like to thank you for the last, I don't know, 20 years being my go-to person for anything to do with French area AR. And I certainly recommend the Frajola sites to anybody who's interested in the AR usage from any country. It's truly amazing what David has in his collections. And I'd also like to give him another thanks. He's somebody who searches the web. He alluded to this with the origin of eBay for these AR covers. So he's endlessly searching, and he's found me a lot of international mail order fraud covers that he's brought to my attention that ultimately ended up in my collection. So he's been a much appreciated and much valued contact over the years. So thank you very much, David.
Well, thank you, Ed. I should say I was really happy and I am still happy to receive inquiries or any information or questions about AR or Canadian postal history for that matter.
I have another kind of a little trivial one, but how many AR return receipts with original letters have you united over the years?
Not many, because I have very often, most of the ones I purchased were purchased together. Once or twice, I picked well, the form and the cover separately, but I knew because they appeared in eBay at more or less the same time, and I just checked that they were from the same source. But almost always you get them together, or else you just don't find them. There aren't very many of them, and I don't have very many. So to get the reconstructed ones where I had to buy them separately, perhaps once or twice.
Well, I only found one in the French colonies group type issue in all my years of collecting. That was about 40 years, 45 years. So they're tough to find.
Did I buy it from you?
I don't know. When I sold the collection, I just didn't follow up.
Okay.
I didn't want to look at the results, either the very good ones or the very bad ones, and
Yeah.
just ignored it and was happy the collection was sold.
All right, well,
If
thanks.
anyone else, oh, sorry, Rob, if anyone who is in the audience does want to ask a question, you're happy to just raise your hand like everyone else. You don't have to sashay over here, even though we do miss seeing you.
All
That's
right.
the guilt trip, right? Back to you, Rob. Sorry.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ed. It's good to see you here tonight. Anthony Hughes.
Just a comment, I was very interested in the Irish 1921 from Kerry. I didn't quite away welcome to Hello from Ireland. and it was a very interesting talk. Thank you very much, David. But just on the Irish 1921 one from Kerry, I missed the date on it. It's interesting because if it's later than June 21, it was at the height of the Irish Civil War. That may explain why somebody wanted to know whether the letter was delivered or not. And at that time, the Civil War was particularly vicious in Kerry. So I find that, from a historical point of view, very interesting. There's a lot of destruction of the mail during the Civil War. So thanks very much for showing that, David.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have a question about that. You look at the Master Guy, yeah. I noticed that it was during the Civil War, but I really had no idea, or I really knew almost nothing about it. So I just it just seemed weird, because for one thing, they didn't seem to have any official stationery at all, because they used a regular envelope.
Yeah, that the Civil War would probably explain that. It was a small office as well, and possibly it didn't have those forms. But as I said, the war was particularly vicious in Kerry, and
Yeah.
a lot of the mail was being interrupted because it was a source of revenue. During the War of Independence, the IRA at the time raided a lot of the trains for mail for a couple of reasons. For military intelligence, because the military were using the trains initially, which I find a bit stupid. Eventually, after a few years, they did turn to aircraft to carry their military mail. Registered letters were always a source of income. And then during the Civil War, between the pro-treaty and the anti-treaty started raiding the trains for the very same reason, not for military intelligence, but particularly for finance. And Kerry, as I said, the Civil War in Kerry was particularly vicious. It was one of the, where all civil wars, it was brother against brother. So, and that might explain why somebody wanted to know whether the mail was delivered or not. But thanks for a very interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, Richard Moss.
Oh, good evening. I get the impression that in the 21st century that this service is not used very much, and over the years I think I've only received about 3 or 4. Well, it's over the last 8 years, and on 3 of the 4 occasions I've received ARs, and that's all I've had, and they've all come from Italy. My postman hasn't known what to do with them, and the AR they're posted through the door with the AR card attached. And the only way the sender has found out whether they've been delivered or not is because I've sent him an email.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is it in actual fact relatively few countries that use it now?
Well, I actually, it's a quite well-known phenomenon that you occasionally find, well, actually fairly frequently from some countries, registered mail with the AR card or form still attached, and it was clearly not returned to sender, which would be the normal explanation, but it was almost certainly delivered, and that simply means they ignored it. You find this frequently for Canada, and I've received perhaps over the past 20 years, I've received probably about 40 or 50 for which the AR card was just ignored. Of course, people probably knew of my interest in AR, which is why I received so many, but they never got the AR card back. So what I would do was to sign it and put it in the mail, because it should pass through the mail free. And but I never inquired what happened after that. So it was sort of a fun game. But I think there's far less reason for AR because, for example, in Canada, you can get the scans of the signature for ordinary registration. So there's no need for it because you have the evidence right there. And so there's no AR, no domestic AR, and it's been that way for quite a while. But there still is an international AR, but the need for it is really declined because you have all these electronic extra services. And anyway, my interests don't go much beyond 1960. So
I had got the impression that I had heard that Canada still used the system, but the only other ones I've ever had have been from Italy.
yeah, I suspect that's because of the the alleged unreliability of the Italian postal service. You find a somewhat correlation between perceived unreliability and the use of AR. For example, South America, even really tiny countries, you can get stuff from the early period, which you wouldn't expect. But but it was cheap. It was cheaper than registration, for example. It was half the price normally, and you could find it. And they must have used it a lot because there's still material you find on eBay, usually overpriced, but there's lots and lots of stuff from South America, and that's a perturbation. And I suspect it's because the Postal Service wasn't terribly reliable. Even registration wasn't reliable. But with AR, at least you could get evidence that it was delivered in
Thank you.
principle.
The other thing I'd like to just point out is that the person who sends me something from Italy occasionally, he when he sent his when he sent me a remittance this year, he in actual fact he said, "I know you're interested in the ARs I've sent in the past, so here are the receipts for the two I sent in 2021 and 23."
Yes.
So they're reunited.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Duncan.
Yes, I was going to say the Furphy book, which I referenced in my talk on GB postal rates, has international GB AR rates, and Maurice Buxton is on the line, so I'm not saying nasty things about him behind his back. They don't seem to be on the GBPS website, but the inland ones are on the GBPS website, and they probably extend beyond the scope of Michael's book, which is just the 20th century.
Yeah. You can also find the British AR fees in my UK exhibit on Fragola's board. I don't know where I
Comes
got
Maurice to his defense.
Yeah.
No,
The other thing, the other question, I was wrong. I actually just checked back to see what I'd written. Were there ever AR cards returned by airmail with extra postage paid to pay the difference between surface and airmail? It happened with reply postage cards.
Right. Well, not from UK. I don't have any examples from UK, but I have examples from many other places. And for international AR, it's available. I found some reference from 1938. You could do it, but this depended highly. You could ask for the card to be returned by airmail if you were willing to pay the airmail fee in the opposite direction, because it's going to be coming from the foreign country to you, but you paid the airmail fee, and if the registered letter itself were sent by air. But there are examples known from previous to 38, particularly in French colonies, where they paid the airmail postage, but I seem to recall reading that for UK, you just paid the same amount. It didn't depend on the destination. It was just a flat charge for the airmail. But I don't have any examples, and in general, they're really hard to find, even for the US. They're not at all easy. Domestic US are somewhat easier, but they're still difficult to find.
Okay, Maurice, now defend yourself, please.
No, Duncan's correct. I did omit to include the overseas ones on the site. I could have sworn it was there, but apparently that's something I forgot. So it's something I'll make a quick mental note to add as soon as possible. On the airmail thing, I believe the UPU changed it to return the things by airmail round about 1971. You did the later ones, I believe you do see them with airmail stickers. The other thing that David brought up, which I thought I might talk about, the difference between the number of covers you see and the number of forms. I've always assumed that's because the whole point of AR was to have a proof of the letter being delivered, which usually meant the person who was sending it was very keen to keep the form as proof, and the person getting the letter was probably just ripped it up and threw it away because they were being dumped for a bill or something. So that would, I think, be a reasonable explanation of why the covers are so much rarer than the forms.
Well, it's nice to meet you finally, Maurice.
Yeah.
But for other countries, you don't find that. You find, first of all, the domestic covers are far more common. Domestic AR covers are far more common than the cards and forms. For every other major country, of countries of which I have examples.
Okay.
So I don't really, yeah. It may be, as you say, that for in Britain they didn't they didn't want to be reminded of their receiving a legal form or a summons or something, so they wanted to throw it out as fast as possible. But for other countries, I can't give any statistics, but I suspect it's I don't, so I just don't know. By the way,
Are these countries which made much greater use of AR?
No, Canada, for example, is about comparable in use to UK,
Okay.
in comparison to UK. And well, because I've specialized in, I've collected Canadian AR for about 40 years, much longer than every other country. I can say, well, they're both, for one thing, they're both common, both the domestic cards and covers. Whereas for Britain, the covers are really hard to find and the forms are not that hard to find, but they're still not, it's not trivial to find them. By the way, I was going to acknowledge your contribution to my talk because you pointed out the two forms and the start of British AR internationally, and I was so nervous I completely forgot about it.
Okay. You reminded me, I do have a bunch of photographs of stuff from the archives which I need to sort out. So when that gets done, I'll send a PDF over.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
David, you could
Maurice.
see Ed now.
Yeah,
Oh.
Ed Kubowski.
I had to go around and around a couple of times, and I
Well, you
finally
just
got the selection of choices I wanted, and I was able to bring my picture. Joan, can I share the screen?
Certainly, Ed, you could do. I
I
never say no to Ed Kubowski.
you never know what I'm going to come up with. David, here's one that was in my group type collection, the Bulletin de Verification.
Yeah.
Did you show one of those?
No, because that's not really AR. This is a
I think that's what this was. Oh, okay. Maybe I was wrong in that what I thought this was for.
Yeah.
I thought it was being used as an AR.
There's no evidence. Bulletin de Verification refers to something about registered letters being recorded or something. You see them between lots and lots of countries, and I suspect it accompanied the mail or the other mail.
Okay.
Some someone surely will explain it, but I'm fairly certain it's not AR.
Okay. Well, I guess I got that wrong in my exhibit. I'll have to go correct it.
Oh. Can I, yeah, the bulletin of verification, it's basically an irregularity inquiry.
Okay.
It's when the post office what the post office gets doesn't match what is included in the forms it gets. So it sends one of these verification notes to say, why have you sent us the wrong thing? Often that is because a registered letter's missing, yes, but it can be because there's a missing mail bag or something as well. They are fairly scarce from what I've seen for most things. But I think there's a rule they sent them registered as well, so which is why you see the labels and marks on. Which I wouldn't have known except somebody gave me a copy of the details from the UPU treaty originally. But if you look at the back implementation of the treaty section of the UPU things, they've got illustrations what the forms are and how you were meant to do one of these inquiries. I mean they are. I mean, I see John Copeland's on here, who's done sterling work in picking up or in finding all the UPU treaties online. So they are actually available as in PDF form. I mean, if John, if you could put a link to your list of resources in the chat, that might be quite helpful.
If I can work out how, I will.
Right.
All right, thanks, Maurice. Steve Zarinsky.
Evening, everybody. Thank you,
evening.
David. Great presentation. One question I have is I have a lot of local Mauritius commercial mail from the 90s and 2000s, and they used AR designations on a lot of the mail with some regularity. Do you think the Mauritian were fearful of their postal services?
Well, yeah, I was going to say French colonies tended to use AR far more than British colonies, but then I realized Mauritius was a British colony, although it had been French way before.
Exactly. So you're right in both counts.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. That is always odd. It seemed odd to me that you can find well, not massive, but substantial amounts of stuff from small countries that you wouldn't expect, and then from big countries you can't find
See, nothing. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. There was a question here sent in a little bit earlier, David. Can you elaborate a bit more on that morning cover, about the AR morning cover? They wanted to know, was that just for the Queen's death?
I believe so. I don't know that much about it. I've seen two other examples, and I know, for example, that Canada issued official their official stationery, or not stationery, envelopes were bordered in black after some of them after the deaths of Victoria and then Edward, and I think I've seen British ones also. I haven't. I assumed that there would be a British AR covering envelope for the death of Edward, but Edward VII, but I haven't seen any. But I mean, it's so unusual. I imagine somebody who collects British official stationery would know, but apparently Canada did it, presumably following British practice.
All right, thanks, David. Anthony Hughes.
I am on my mute.
Your
I
son.
can tell you a bit about. I know a lot of departments in Ireland in 1901 and 1902, court departments and people like that did issue stationery ordered in black. Not all departments, and may have. I don't know now. It may have been up to the individual government department, but I do know the court services, local court services used it, and other departments did these because I've a few of them used locally. But it's just Queen Victoria's death I have seen. That's all I can add to that.
Thanks, Anthony. Tony Plum.
I was just going to say that there is a Queen Victoria mourning cover from Lagos. Again, an OHMS imprint on it.
So presumably the parts of the empire did that.
It would seem that a directive was sent out, or a stock of envelopes was sent out to each of the then colonies.
Yeah, Canada wasn't a colony, but they followed suit anyway.
Dominion, or
yeah.
Right.
Now I'm gonna have to go through my collection to see if I have any of those, and I'll send it to you for validation if I have something.
Peter Moore, you had your hand up a little earlier. You still have a question?
Yeah. Yeah, most of the countries used the registration forms. I collect Colombia and Panama, and they had stamps overprinted with AR. Are there any other countries that used overprinted stamps?
Well, they had Colombia and Panama. Not just, they didn't only have overprinted ones; they had actual AR stamps, which were intended as AR. There were 5 other countries that used stamps. I don't think any of them were overprinted AR. I have a list of them in the AR book that's on Fragola's. I went through an old catalogs to find who issued AR stamps. I think it was 1943 Vertelier, because I'm too cheap to buy, and there's no need for me to buy updated catalogs. So I went through it. Then I went through a 1950s Scots to look for all the countries that issued AR stamps. There are only a few. There are also only a few who issued registration stamps too, but I don't recall seeing any other countries with overprinted AR. I guess that would, if they would have been classified as AR stamps, I guess. So they might have, if they had been there, they probably would have appeared in the catalogs. Maybe. I don't know.
Probably. I wish that they were using the AR again, because a lot of mail that I should receive, I don't receive. And even registered mail from, for instance, well, Germany or England, America, Canada, doesn't arrive.
Yeah, I would say especially registered doesn't arrive. Not just some registered, actually.
True. I bought two lots in Spain, and one I really wanted to have, so I had registered it. It didn't arrive yet. The other one, which I bought later, didn't register, arrived today. So I'm fearful that I might not receive the other letters at all.
Yeah, the situation was so bad with American mail to Canada that a number of years ago, even before Trump, Canada refused to send registered mail to the US because it was just getting lost. You have to find other means of tracking it. So it just
Brown wrapper.
Mm,
That's it.
yeah, I think that I will use no registration at all and hope the best. Because registration doesn't work.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just insure it. So we make sure that we have adequate insurance coverage. It doesn't make up for it. But every time we put, a customs declaration with a value, that's it. 50% of the time it doesn't arrive.
But there is something you can do if you don't get the card back, and that is to file a complaint, with the post office. It'll take ages and ages, but even 20 years ago, there was a $60 compensation fee. So just for not getting, if you send something with AR and you don't get the card back, you can, in principle, there's a form, or there used to be a form you could get, fill it out, and months later they would send you a check for $60 because it hadn't been returned. That doesn't concern the registration part of it, simply the AR part of it. And a friend of mine used to make a reasonable, a substantial amount of money from this in the late 90s, because cards on registered mail from Canada simply had a low probability of returning, especially to Eastern Europe.
Edith and Dale Egan, you have a question?
Well, not a question, but I wanted to say something that was an amusing incident that happened to me about 6 years ago. I sent a registered letter from California to British Columbia. And then I went online to check progress. And I saw that it had been delivered a couple years ago, before that, to an address in Kansas. And so I went over and talked to the postmaster and tracked it down. And certainly enough, the registration number on the registered letter I sent was identical to one that had been used a few years earlier. They had some sort of special tracking system, and they were able to assure me that indeed my registered letter was on its way to BC.
Did it get there?
Yes, I did. And I got notification back from the recipient on that. But I found that quite amusing that in the post office system, there were two identical registered letters with the same numbers a few years apart.
Well, that shouldn't have happened, but
So no, I heard that there was a couple of countries that did away with their postal service. Is that true, or was that just like a bad rumor on the internet?
Denmark has done away with their postal service.
Iceland?
So now what are they gonna do for registered mail?
Korea.
It's like no mail.
There is no mail in Denmark.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Same as
all,
Ecuador.
it's electronic. They have, for legal matters, they have very special electronic certified systems for communicating legal documents.
Anthony.
It has only done away with domestic mail. It's still delivering, I think, international mail. It's only domestic mail that they're doing away with, not international mail, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I read.
Denmark. I have read today that they're actually closing their service for mail at the end of the year,
Yes.
and they are going to be removing all the over the next 6 months. They're going to be removing all the post boxes from the roads. And in terms of stamps, the article I read said that if you bought stamps in 2004 and 2024 and 2025, you're going to be able to cash them. But what's going to happen to the earlier ones appears to be that they're not going to do anything with you. You've just had it.
Yeah, that's correct, what you're saying.
That's a bummer.
That's not as bad as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia issues stamps, but you can't use them.
Really?
Yes, you can't use them at all. I'm a member of the Saudi Arabia Society, and there has been a few attempts to send stamps on a letter from Saudi Arabia to the rest of the world, but it's impossible. And the rate of sending a letter to the US is 39 reals, and the highest values are 3 reals. So you would need 13 stamps, which you can't use. So I don't think that Scott would be putting that any catalog would list these labels, these very expensive labels, in their catalogs at all. None.
The rumor I had just from last weekend was that Amos Publications was going to cease publishing Scott's catalogs in the future.
Well, we have them on queue to join us, so we'll get some questions to them. My understanding was they might be going all digital,
Yeah.
but I could be wrong, and we could ask the horse's mouth when he shows up.
It seems that most publishers are in trouble because Stanley Gibbons recently said that they would reprint the Middle East catalogs, but there would not be a new issue. And I don't know how it is with Michel. They still issue catalogs, but they are very expensive. If you one part of a catalog is almost $100. And for instance, for Europe, they are not as expensive. They are about 50 euros, $50. You need 22 catalogs to have Europe complete. So that's well above the price for a Scott catalog complete.
Clearly.
Yeah, it's over 1,000 euros. And most countries now, or most continents, are 2 catalogs. For instance, South America has 2. So it's about 200 euros for South America complete. $200 for the Middle East, north and south of the Middle East. About $100 for each.
That's why David stays before 1960. No new issues.
Maybe you should stay before 1940. Then you have a Scott Classic or an Iver Classic, and you're done.
My favorite catalog.
Yeah, mine too. But it's very expensive to get it into the Netherlands. And one of the literature dealers in the Netherlands doesn't stock Scott anymore. It is too expensive, and he can't get his money back.
Yeah, it is expensive. We had a fellow back out of his sale because the postage was just like, it was outrageous, no matter what service we used. So
the Scott or any of the foreign catalogs?
Do you get to the US, Peter?
No, I have a friend that will come in April. And
okay.
And when I need something from America, he will take it with him. So he will take about 20 or 25 kilograms of books from America to collectors in Europe.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
I will
that's-
give him things that people in America can use. So somebody is getting some imperf Hungarian stamps from me from the 50s and 60s, which are still not very common, but not as expensive as they used to be. But it is hard to get stamps from all over the world. The postal prices have risen sharply, even from countries that used to be $5 or $6. They're now $10, $12. And that's nice if you buy large things, but usually I need 1 or 2 stamps for $2 or $3. It's not worth it anymore.
That's tough.
We were
Well,
just in Copenhagen and went to mail some postcards to our friends and got a little shock to do that. International was 50 krona, which is about $7.50. So we limited the number of postcards we sent. We actually sent one to ourselves because we couldn't believe $7.50 rate.
Gary, you're like looking not surprised. But,
So little is surprising when it comes to finance nowadays. Inflation is inflation, and this is not Germany in the 20s, but no, things are just very expensive. If you want, you pay. If you're not willing to pay, you won't get. And that's the state of the world today.
Well, there's threats in the United States. My understanding that one of the proposals is to eliminate the U.S. postal system.
I'm dubious of that strictly because if anybody is going to pay attention to our Constitution, it's in Article 4. After the definition of what the government was about, the most important thing that the authors of the Constitution thought to put in was postal service. So even though it's not technically a government organization, it remains a government instrumentality. And while little at my age shocks me, that probably would.
Knock on wood.
we still have those little green cards that you could get sent back. Where you have to have someone sign the same stuff we were talking about tonight. Where you could get the little green card back when someone gets a letter. So.
Yeah, that's something that doesn't work in the Netherlands anymore. When we have a mail that should be signed for, they just push it to the post box and don't bother.
Yeah,
it's very bad. And my son had a train delivered by mail, and we were home, but the mailman was very lazy, so he put a $200 train on the doorstep. He tried to drive away, but I ran after him, and I told him that he shouldn't never do that again, or I would file a complaint.
So David, any final words before we put you to sleep?
No, not that I can think of.
It was a great presentation.
Yes.
I learned so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic presentation. That should be in everybody's archives.
Just a comment. When I was talking to David earlier, he's got a book on the topic that's been out of print for decades from what I understand, but he's got several copies available. Anybody that would have an interest in this, contact David on that. And I know he knows the exact price for US and Canada on it. Shipping may be another story. Yeah. And then the other comment would be Richard Fragiola's website. Really, people, any of you who aren't familiar with it really ought to take a dip in it. Just take a look at the depth there. I mean, there's so much information and examples of things in that site. It's really worth going there. Thanks.
Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks,
Good night,
David.
everybody.
Not the Antiques Roadshow. Although I anticipate that many in the audience are